And this is the story of Rumpelstiltskin. Now, once there was a poor miller who wanted to improve his business. And so he went to the castle of his king and he put on his finest woolen suit to impress. But when he got there, everyone was dressed in silks and he looked quite worn and threadbare. Still, he had his counsel with the king, and if he embroidered the facts a bit, if he blagged a bit, well, that's just salesmanship, right? And so he was telling the king that he had the biggest mill in the county, and his flour was ground so fine that the fairies themselves bake with it. And he was assisted in everything by his daughter, who was so talented, why, she could spin straw into gold. And the king looked up from the scroll that he was reading and he said, really? Straw into gold? And the miller said, yes. And the king looked at the poor miller and said, well, I don't think you appreciate her talents then, if you've turned up into my court looking like that. She shall spin for us. And the king gave orders, a room filled to the brim with straw with a spinning wheel, and the girl forced into the room. And you will spin all of this straw into gold, the king said, by morning, or you and your father die. Well, the girl, bewildered, shocked, she sat on the stool and wept until suddenly before her there stood a rather ugly, toad-like little man who said, well, I can spin it into gold. I'll take your necklace. I'll do it for you. Well, sure. And he did. By morning, that whole room full of straw was gold. And the king and his courtiers came in laughing, because, of course, they expected to enjoy 2 fine executions before breakfast. But in fact, there was all that gold. Well, the king was not one to miss an opportunity. He ordered a second room, twice as big, twice as much straw. And again, the girl must spin it to gold by morning, or else. Again, the little man appeared and said he would do it in exchange for her ring. Well, the girl said, yes, of course. And again that morning, the king came in. He looked around and said, excellent. Now, girl, we have one more task for you. I have a barn that holds 100 horses. I have filled it with straw. You will spin all of that to gold by morning. And when you've done that, why, lucky girl, you'll be my wife. I'll make you my queen. But don't do it, and you die. Well, the poor girl, of course, the little man turned up, but the girl had nothing left to barter with. And the ugly little man looked at her and said, you know what? You do. The king will make you his wife. He will make you queen. And in a year or so, you'll have a child. That is my payment, your firstborn. And the girl said, who would make such a bargain? And then she thought, there's no way that king is going to marry a poor miller's daughter. And if I have a child, who knows? So she agreed. And all of that straw was spun to gold. The next morning, the king came in, and he was as good as his word. The girl was whisked off by servants to a fine chamber and bathed and fed and given wonderful silk clothes to wear. And then her life became a whirlwind of social engagements, jousts and banquets and parties. And soon enough, they were married and she was the queen. And well, she threw herself into the duties of being the queen, of trying to turn her husband's heart away from some of his more harsher edicts. And she got pregnant and she had the child. And when that child was about 3 months old, she was enjoying some rare privacy in her chambers nursing the baby. And that little man appeared and demanded his payment. And the queen said, oh, no, we were joking. You don't really want my child. I had nothing to barter with then, but I do now. I have lands. I have gold, jewels, silks, name it, anything, not my child. But the little man was adamant. And the queen became hysterical, crying out in horror. People began to rush up the corridor to see what was wrong. And the little man said, "All right, I'll give you one chance. Guess my name, and I'll free you from your promise. I'll give you 3 nights in honor of my 3 nights of labor. Guess my name, and you'll be free, but you won't guess it, and I will take your child." He vanished, and the servants rushed in, and of course no one really listened to the queen. What a ridiculous story, and you know how childbearing can turn a woman's head. And the court physician gave her a sleeping draught and put her to bed, and no one really paid attention to what she was saying, except for one. And that was a young page, the first one through the door as it happened. And he had seen something. And so while the queen was the next day begging everyone in the court for the suggestions of names, that young page was out in town and out in the countryside, talking to the old people, gathering the names of every fairy and demon and unworldly creature they could think of. But despite all their hard work, it all seemed for naught. The first night, the queen presented a whole list of names to the ugly little man, and he just laughed and said no. And the second night again, no, none of them were right. And the little man said, "I'll have your child tomorrow." Well, the queen was distraught. She was horrified. The court physician gave her another sleeping draught, which this one she only pretended to drink, but she paced the floor of her chambers, distraught, waiting for that page to come back, hoping he had found something. And dusk fell, but he did not return, and darkest night, and no, and it was 10 o'clock and 11. And finally he stumbled into her chambers, filthy and exhausted from travel. He said, "My queen, I only have one name for you. I can only hope that it's the right one. I followed a rumor through the darkest forest to a swamp, and there was a rocky island where a little ugly creature, matching your description, was dancing and singing to himself. He said the queen would never guess such a name." Well, the ugly little creature appeared before the queen and said, "I'll take your child tonight." And the queen said, "I have one more opportunity. Is your name David, like the king?" "No." "Is it Michael, like the archangel?" "No." "Well," said the queen, "then I think you must have the name of a demon, Rumpelstiltskin." And the little man shrieked and burst into flames and vanished, leaving behind only a foul stench. And never again in that castle or that kingdom was such a creature seen.